Welcome back to the Heartland Leadership Podcast, a podcast all about leadership and the way of Jesus. My name's Clinton.
Hi, I'm Tony.
And I'm Phil.
And you are in episode 3 right now. And I have 2 experts in the art of worship. 2 minstrels.
That's right.
Yeah.
Couple
Minstrels
of bards.
might be a little bit better than experts.
Yeah.
Learned in the ways of the voice and the string.
And the string. That's us. Yeah.
Okay.
We make a joyful noise with our instruments and our throats.
And what I want to talk about today is to hear straight from the horse's mouth, what is worship? What is it?
What is it?
Like, you lead worship. You're
Yeah.
the worship director,
Yeah.
or creative arts director, I guess. But you're both worship leaders. You're leading people, and you're calling it worship.
Yeah.
What is worship? What are we doing here?
I'm happy to take a stab, but I'd also love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Do you want me? I mean, I think you have more formulated thoughts than I do.
That's why I
about
want to
it.
hear yours.
Sure.
I don't want to just
I
give my
don't-
speech.
Yeah, and I don't want to just
I want
echo
to
your
catch
speech.
Phil LaHue roll.
Yeah, here. So this will maybe be a little bit more raw, as the more raw of the 2 horses is.
Let's see what comes out of his mouth.
Yeah, let's hear what comes out of my mouth. Yeah, I tend to think of worship pretty much as an attitude or like a heart posture. And I know I'm already probably just pillaging
Plunder away.
plundering what Tony said, but I tend to think of it as a posture of the heart while you're doing some sort of activity, whether it's, it can be as basic of an activity as sitting or meditating. I believe that just about any activity that is glorifying to God and that is in line with what God's best is for us can be worship if our attitude is to do that activity while glorifying God or Jesus and celebrating what he's done for us.
Now,
Yeah.
Tony and I did a podcast back in 2018 on our other platform, Open to Truth, episode 5, What is Worship?
Yeah.
And at that time, can I read you a quote
You
of
have a
yourself?
quote from me. Okay, yeah.
When I asked you this question, you said, any activity that brings glory to God, any act that places appropriate worth on the person of Jesus Christ. Tony, 2018.
That is almost verbatim what I would have said.
Really?
Had Phil wanted me to do my speech. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I just mean because, so I grew up in evangelical circles, Christian circles, and for a long time, sort of practically what worship meant, that word was used to refer to when a group of Christians in a building sing kind of a slow song to God together.
Really? Not the fast ones?
That was praise. Yeah,
Oh my
that was
gosh.
praise. Worship was the slow ones. And nobody ever came out and told me that was the case, but for all intents and purposes, that's how it played out, was worship refers to these slow songs where some people look like they're in pain, and some people cry, and some people smile, and people are moved emotionally in some way. That's what worship was. And I remember my dad really challenging that paradigm for me when he asked me, or he told me at some point that you can worship God by pushing a broom. And I was like, what do you mean worship God by pushing a broom? And I think it just does, to your point, what he was driving at was that our whole life is to be lived as an act of worship.
Well, why would God care if you're pushing a broom? He's got a lot on his mind, a lot to think about.
Well, because there's motivations behind pushing a broom that could be worshipful. So, for example, there's an old woman in your neighborhood who's got a sore back and her house is dusty. Mm-hmm. And
Sounds
you
like
want
the start of a nursery rhyme.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you want to serve her in some way to show her that you value her as an image bearer of God, to honor God and to honor her as God's daughter. You're going to serve her by sweeping her floor or something.
Right. It's kingdom focused.
It's kingdom, right, exactly. I'm sure I'd have to concoct some marvelous story, but I'm sure you could push a broom out of spite.
Right, let's say I
Right?
broke into someone's house and smashed their prized
Great.
vase
Yeah.
and swept up the shards.
And now you are court ordered.
Would that be?
And now you are court ordered to do restitution, and you can do that. I think it depends on the heart posture.
Yeah.
Right. You could be forced to do chores, or you
Yep.
can do them
You can-
worshipfully.
Right, you can do them bitterly or you can do them with joy in your heart.
So it does sound like when you say, just want to get super clear.
Please.
When you say that worship is a posture of the heart, maybe that of trying to give glory to God, then literally anything that I can do with my body or with my mind could be an act of worship.
Yeah, I guess I would, and maybe you want to jump on this too. I guess worship for me becomes the umbrella that all of our life is supposed to fall under. The whole life is supposed to be lived as worship, not just 20 minutes on a Sunday morning when music's playing.
Then why do we call it a worship service? Is that
Well,
technically is worship,
Can I-
but so is everything else.
can I get there in a second? I do
Sorry.
want to finish that thought. That's okay. Just to your point, anything at all can be worship. Well, I don't know about that. Like, this is graphic, but like stabbing children, probably not going to be an act of worship. Maybe that's how you worship the Dark Lord or something. But, it needs to be anything that would be, that would like align
Voldemort.
with God's nature and his character. I'm
Okay.
thinking, can you worship God through sin? I don't. I think those two are incompatible. But
I see.
otherwise, yeah, like
Okay.
with your words, with your body, with how you operate yourself.
Any
through the
morally
day.
neutral act
Great. Any morally neutral or positive act, I think, can be
could
an,
be.
an act of worship.
Not necessarily.
Totally.
No, not necessarily.
You might not be worshiping while you're doing dishes,
Oh no. Right.
taking a shower,
Absolutely.
driving.
One that I think could be seen as positive, like, is maybe morally positive, but like isn't always worshipful, but we tend to celebrate it societally anyways, is just like giving, right? If we give
Yeah, right.
give to charities, even giving to churches, I think you can give to a church 2 Sundays in a row. One Sunday, it's not necessarily from a worshipful standpoint, right? As it feels like a box you're checking, right? Or something that you're doing just because you have to. That's what a good disciple does. And then the second Sunday, it's no, actually, this is an activity where I've reflected on it. I have, thanked God that I have the resources, the funds to give to his kingdom, and that he allows me to steward them and to give joyfully. And so I think it's just, there's some nuance there.
So can I press into the word posture? Because
Yeah.
there are plenty of times when I'm in the car, I'm driving, which is that's a neutral act that I could be in a state of worship. But sometimes I'm blasting some Taylor Swift or some Justin Bieber, and I'm singing my heart out, and I'm just enjoying my drive, my nice day. Am I worshiping? I'm not sinning, I don't think. I'm not in
Yeah.
the stabbing children department. But I don't have my mental apparatus is not directed at God and like trying to laud his attributes.
You're saying to what degree does conscious attention come into it?
Yes.
Is
yeah,
that what you're saying?
I think so.
I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that. I kind of think that you can totally glorify God unconsciously at times.
Wow.
But doesn't that
Do you
seem possible?
Do you have a response to that?
Sure. I tend to think like that he could be pleased. He could be pleased that you are enjoying your day, enjoying the
Right.
beautiful sunshine, driving down the road,
But am I
carefree,
worshiping?
listening to Taylor Swift. Right.
I
But
hear
like
your
whether
question.
you're right, and I think that's kind of like, okay, if you were spending time with your children, and you were just kind of there and enjoying yourselves, and they just like knew dad's in their room versus dad is looking at me and paying attention
Yeah.
to me, or like enjoying my shared presence in the room. I think that's a slightly different. Again, it's nuanced, but I think there's a
like
slight
that.
difference there. If it strikes you and you turn some of your attention, even just briefly, like, Thank you, God, that I am able to drive down the road carefree, listening to this great Taylor Swift record, enjoying the wind in your hair. I think just like turning your attention has something to do with it. That posture. But I don't think that. But to Tony's point, I don't think that means that the act, unless you are attentive, becomes unglorifying to God.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just a matter of. Like, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive.
Or can I throw out another example to you? So in your specific role on Sunday mornings, you are a minstrel, if you will, just to use a funny term.
I will.
And you're on stage and you like have a pretty high standard of quality and you're trying to not make errors in the playing of your voice or instrument. And so in a way, maybe particularly for songs that you aren't quite used to doing, you're really focused on like performing well. And that's great. Like that's kind of your role. You're leading us in worship. But in that act, are you then not worshiping? Because there's this attitude of maybe you get lost in worship.
Right.
And you're not even thinking about it and you're just singing to God. But other times you might be like really, I got to hit the G chord and the C chord here. are you worshiping and not worshiping in those examples, or like I think this ties into the conscious attentiveness piece.
Yeah, and maybe that needs to be. Maybe we just break it out into conscious worship and unconscious worship or
Okay.
something. But like when I think about the example you just gave, it happens every week, that there is some degree of execution that demands some part of my conscious attention, right? So I can't only be thinking about the attributes of God all morning, or things will fall off the rails. But me choosing to use my conscious attention to lead a band to serve the rest of the congregation in worship and facilitate that, still to me seems to be the metagame is worship, even if in that moment my attention is on a particular detail of this bigger thing that we're doing called corporate worship. So in that case, I think it's all worship. I do think, for what it's worth, it's our responsibility as worship leaders to hone our craft to the point that we can free up as much mental bandwidth as possible, during a live set or something like that. I wanted to, I can see you got a question on your lips, but I do just want to touch on, because I don't think we hit it, your question of why do we call it a worship service and what's the value of corporate worship? Why do we come together to worship at all?
Yeah.
If anything can be worship, and our whole life is
If I
supposed
can just
to
do
be
it at
worship,
home all week with my normal routine.
Right, who cares that we're on quarantine? Who cares that we're on lockdown? Why don't we all just worship in our living rooms? Do you have anything to say? What's the value of corporate worship?
Yeah, I mean, what's the point of getting together in a stadium to watch a football game you can watch at home? What's the point of going to a yoga studio if you could do yoga at home on your TV, right? It's to gather with other people who are taking joy in doing the same thing and paying and directing attention again, like corporately to the same thing. And we as Christians have the honor of like turning our attention towards a God who loves us collectively and individually, and we've been doing this for 2,000 plus years now, right? Like this is a tradition that we and before then, if you look towards Judaism, right? It's tradition to gather in the temple, and I think we feel connectedness to the original disciples of Jesus through the way that we gather on Sunday mornings and spend time worshiping and fellowship with one another. And so I think there's like a lot of value towards worshiping corporately. And I'm personally really fed by that. Yeah.
Now, do you find it in particularly tough as a worship leader to be in an attitude of worship on a Sunday morning? If I could just elicit some vulnerability from you. Because I could definitely see like you're in front of all these people and you're like, man, I really nailed that vocal run. Probably happens a lot. That thought could come through a lot in a worship set, like, man, I nailed that. And at that moment, is God glorified in that, or is that worship when you're like focused on yourself and your accomplishments? Or
Yeah, I mean, you can speak to your experience as well. I kind of think about it in terms of like, there is so much mental activity that's going on a Sunday morning. When we are leading a band and leading the church in worship, there are at least 4 conversations that I think that we're having, maybe 5 that we're having simultaneously. We're communicating with the band about where we're going and what we're doing. We're communicating with the congregation about how to engage and where to set our attention. We're communicating with God, hopefully. We're not just singing lyrics to the ceiling. We are hopefully communicating with God and interacting. Communicating with the enemy or whatever those thoughts are that, for example, would tell you, boy, you got a great voice. Big churches would love to have you. Or who are you to be leading on stage? I know what you did yesterday. All of that is going on in your head.
wow.
And then, you're having conversations with yourself about, I shouldn't be thinking about this stuff, or I've got this thing coming up. There's a lot that's going on mentally. So I find for myself, if I'm being completely vulnerable and honest, it's like there are brief windows on a Sunday morning where my bandwidth is freed up enough to completely enter in for like this bridge or something. It's like, or this particular chorus or something.
Yeah, they're shorter. I'd love to It'd be really funny to see it graphed out. Like I almost would like to immediately after service watch back and go through and plot with those different conversations that go on, or the different you can break it down a million different ways, I'm sure, but it's been interesting, especially so since starting this job about 9 months ago or whatnot. It's been wild to see my bandwidth for worship increase as I've been able to just kind of wrap my head around more of the base level execution things that I need
Yeah,
to
and you
make
can start to
happen.
automate some of
starting
those things a little.
starting to automate those things
Yeah.
and really free up more of my conscious brain to turn attention towards
Yeah.
like glorifying God through worship and just like again setting my posture to one of worship rather than
Yeah.
like we're talking about like execution and then obviously like and even then you're still battling the like
Oh,
the
yeah.
inner voice which is like
Which-
oh dude you totally botched that
Yeah.
and
Oh,
I just
man.
and the question that the thing that I always have to like I always reset with is just like that's really not going to stop Jesus from moving with people, if they are themselves. Like if I've done my job guiding them to turn their own attention and their own hearts towards worshiping Jesus and celebrating the good news, then like surely like a missed chord here and there, even if we have a total meltdown, like of everything breaks down. I think God's still gonna move with that.
Yeah, I do think, for the reason that we're just talking about of this split bandwidth and stuff, I do think it's important, as much as we talk about all of life being worship and stuff, to set aside time. I know for myself, if I set aside time on my own, in my home, with a guitar, or a piano, whatever, just with the intent of spending some time with God and singing to Him without caring about who hears it or how it sounds or any of that, I think that's super important.
I was going to ask that.
To be doing that.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yep. And those for me become actually really rich, usually pretty emotional times for me as well. Because it's like there's not the pressure of executing. It's
Fewer conversations.
right.
Perhaps.
Yeah, one conversation really
Yeah.
that's happening, and it's just complete vulnerability. So I find that essential that I be doing that.
So as curators of the worship experience on a Sunday morning, I'm sure you get lots of questions about, well, why do we do it this way? Why do we have these lights and the cameras and the big motion graphics? Like, are there any expressions of worship, if you will, that are out of line? We mustn't do them. Other than like morally
The stabbing children.
bad
Yeah.
activities. you know.
We mustn't do them. Yeah, no, it's it's interesting. No, so I mean, one of the things I think about as a curator, okay, who is a curator responsible to? And it's the people they are attempting to invite in or send a message to or shepherd in our case, right? Like we are responsible for shepherding people into this awareness of God, into this heightened attentive state, right? And so are there things we must not do? I don't know. There may be there's some things we shouldn't do, right? Because it would
counterproductive
likely be counterproductive or distracting, right?
So, for instance, what if someone wanted to run down the middle aisle and do like 10 minutes of some Warrior 1 and Warrior 3 yoga?
10 minutes.
But they're still kind of in the dark. They're just
like
in the
2
aisle.
songs or a
or
good
if
long
someone wants to do
elevation
a
song.
cartwheel, they're just so excited about "Oh Happy Day," the song.
Mm-hmm.
That's just it's overflowing. Like, I need to do a cartwheel right now. But are you gonna let them do it? Like, why won't we?
Well, I'm certainly not going to shout at them while they're cartwheeling.
we can get into the mechanisms of how we would address it later. Maybe that's a separate podcast
Okay,
of how to
yeah.
gently redirect people. But
But for instance, like I think we've set up a norm at Heartland at least where like
where
that's
that is
going-
not the norm.
Right.
people aren't waving flags or like yelling at the top of their lungs and
Yeah.
stuff. So can you just say more about how you've chosen to create those norms and kind of the thought?
I think we've inherited some of those norms. Some of them have been like, this is how the church has been for 20 years, and that's the kind of church we are, and they're kind of set from the top down when
And
we
this
come
is
in.
what kind of people Midwestern people are
Yeah, exactly.
who interact in Northeast Ohio.
Some of those we've inherited, but like I grew up pretty charismatic in pretty charismatic circles, so I've seen wild expressions
Sure,
of
same,
worship
yeah.
before, and I tend to err on the side of like, go for it. Like, if you feel so overjoyed at God's love for you that you want to jump up and down, or great, that's excellent, well done. I think here in this context, the concern would be, is it taking attention off of Jesus or putting attention onto Jesus, right? So if
I would
somebody was
definitely
like,
look at that
if someone was
bloke
like
that was running around.
tamborining and cartwheeling or something, health and safety would probably ask them to leave, you know. But I'm
there
all
are
for that in the
other-
right setting, is what I would, just to finish that thought. As far as are there better and worse expressions, if there's a church full of tambourine waving, cartwheeling, go for it, man. I'm
Yeah.
fine with that. I got no problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really just like a self-awareness, and like we owe it to the worshipers we're worshiping alongside to not distract or take away from them. If they were that person who was, perhaps it would be equally distracting for that person to not wave a tambourine and to remain sitting during worship
Right.
in the congregation of
Charismatic
worshiping,
church, right.
jumping tambourine.
Hey, why is that
wavers.
guy just holding coffee instead of
Yeah.
being slain in the spirit?
With his arms crossed,
Right.
not singing, right? That guy might, that might be a, equal kind of distraction to them, and I just think it's just an awareness thing, like a respect.
Now, this might be like a really outmoded question for you guys at this point, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, like back in the 50s probably or 60s, when rock and roll starts taking off, the church had a really
You ask
big
about hip shaking.
had a big pushback about it. Like, we don't want to bring rock music into the church and create contemporary rock Christian songs, because it came from this place of like, they're rocking their hips and it's suggestive, and the rhythmic guitar, the bass.
Okay, the rhythmic guitar.
No, and there's some there's some mythology about like rock and roll developed out of blues, which developed out of country and folk music, which came from there's all this mythology about like the devil. Seriously,
occult.
The
Really?
devil and the occult actually functioning and
So
giving
I
blues
just imagine,
players
like, there might
skills
be
and no, there's like a long history of
Yeah.
like traditional Christian music, frowning
Like a four
upon,
on the
influential
floor.
from that.
Creates a trance beat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gets you
Totally.
susceptible to the devil's influence.
Right.
Yeah, it's wild. So sorry, finish your
So
question.
I think there might be listeners of this podcast. Maybe it's a more antiquated concern, but looking ahead, now we have is it EDM?
EDM, yeah.
Electronic dance music,
Yeah.
rap,
Sure.
the
some
rap
hip-hop,
music.
metal.
Is it bad to incorporate those kind of musical forms into worship?
I'm trying
Because
to
of
work
the
out how would you build the argument that it is bad, that it's going to influence people to engage in debaucherous behavior or something? Like,
I guess I'm asking
that
too,
hip hop music I heard in church. Now I'm going to enter into that scene and get some drugs. And
yeah.
what's the danger?
I'm not sure. I think it's probably like you and I probably have a hard time empathizing with
Yeah, I
that
do.
kind of standpoint. But yeah, I'm not sure what the posture would be, because I mean, like if you just took that logic to the extreme or followed it back, like why aren't we all just singing Gregorian chants
right.
or whatever,
Music
right? Like
changes
why
over
are we
time.
not like why do we worship with music that sounds like it belongs outside in culture and in culture that exists outside the church, right?
Yeah.
Like why do we use that medium essentially to tell the story of our God,
I
right?
think you and I also probably both agree that music is like morally neutral.
I was going to ask that. That's
know,
essentially what I'm asking.
It's sound, it's vibrations that form patterns, and none are better or worse.
I
You
shouldn't
know,
be afraid of a certain
you shouldn't
rhythm
be afraid
or
of certain
sound sequence.
sounds. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, that's what music is. It's an organized noise.
Sound is not the only part of the worship experience and atmosphere.
That's correct.
We've also chosen to have colored lights,
Yeah, we have lights.
sometimes motion displays for the lyrics or something moving behind there, like looks like a drone's going through a mountain. It's beautiful to look at. Other aspects, like we've turned the lights down while we're playing music. You guys have made some of those choices. How do you decide what to include or not? Like, why not a fog machine? Why not give everyone glow sticks to do during one of the songs? I don't know. Just
Yeah.
what's kind of the reasoning behind some of those choices?
Glow sticks are kind of a cool idea.
That is a cool idea.
We do kind of do that on Christmas Eve candlelight
bit.
services.
Yeah.
Pretty similar, but I think a summertime glow stick
Oh, okay.
thing might have to
Pretty
happen
good.
when
I
we're
saw
allowed
both
to
of you
meet
go
in
like,
person.
oh.
Glow sticks.
See, we're real open to that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so each of those choices is pretty intentional, at least here at Heartland, and that will totally change depending on which church you go to. But I think we're trying to do a few things across the creative arts spectrum. So everything from lights to sound to video, media that we're using. We are trying on a Sunday morning to tell a story about who our God is. And we're trying to do it through a message, through a sermon, through scripture, and through all of these creative elements that help sort of paint the picture in color and bring it to life. And so For example, with lighting, I think it serves multiple purposes. One of the most obvious ones for me, I think, is our stage lighting or theater lighting serves a similar purpose to what stained glass serves in a cathedral, where it's, look, we've got a beautiful God. We want to create a beautiful space to honor him. It doesn't make this space more holy than other spaces or something like that, but you know, it's a work of art essentially.
And if I can be just really
Please.
frank with it, some of these questions are based on the notion. I think some might complain that it's expensive.
Yeah.
Like they are. The light bulbs are expensive.
Yeah.
Why are we spending this money in this way? And I guess is it an adequate response to say like it's beauty for its own sake? It's beautiful, and like having the beautiful God, and we want to represent that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's. I mean, I know that is what I am saying.
Yeah.
But I've had that thought myself. Like, sky's the limit. That's the thing. If it's like, oh, spend money to make beautiful things,
LED wall.
and that pleases God, right? Well, we could spend a ton of money if we had it, making the most beautiful production you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Is God pleased with that, or should we give the money to orphans? You know.
I wonder this.
I wonder
That's
this.
what I'm asking.
As well. An open question
It's
for me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's an extension of kind of like the preachers and sneakers debate, right? Like, oh, wearing your Sunday best.
Say more about that.
The preachers and sneakers.
Preachers
kind
in
of
sneakers.
preachers and sneakers. Yeah,
Preachers and sneakers, okay.
Yeah, or like, I mean, it's basically just an examination of the role that fashion plays in kind of in mega churches and celebrity pastors, and you know, they wear very, very nice clothes when they preach on Sunday morning. Sometimes like, you know, $800 sneakers or whatever to preach, and they're saying, no, this is my best. I'm making a statement about I believe that God deserves, you know, me to glorify him through, you know, wearing clothes that are befitting of, you know, his presence, or I don't know, however they would describe it, but it's somewhat similar. I mean, it's kind of the like, is it the alabaster jar, right? Like when the woman, you know, breaks. I don't know, it's shared in several gospels, but the woman pours very, very expensive oils over Jesus, basically anointing his body for burial ahead of his crucifixion. And the disciples try to rebuke her and say, what a waste this was. This was, you know, like 2 years' wages or whatnot, and that money could have been sold, or that could have been sold and given to the poor. And Jesus instead says, no, like she in fact has done something beautiful here. She has not missed the point and has actually she has turned her attention to me and realized that those wages, he says, the poor will always be among you. And you have used, she has done something beautiful with this expensive gift. And so I think about it in those terms. I think there are times when, it would be neglectful for us to not step into other things. And I think we try to do a good job of that, stewarding our resources. There are certainly things we say, no, we don't need to do that. We do not have the world's fanciest equipment or whatnot.
That's what I was going to say is I think the guideline we've been using here has been, we want it to be excellent and practical, but not slick, is what Dave would say, right? He doesn't want it to be slick and production-y and like Hollywood, but he wants it to be excellent. And just practically, I mean, you've got hundreds of people showing up. They need to be able to hear the sermon. Okay, well, we better get a sound system, and we better get a room to put these people in, and we better get a microphone that's going to sound good and not crap out on us halfway through. So some of it is sort of out of necessity of this format.
I get that kind of utilitarian part of it, and that I think most people would be on board with that. It's just that extra maybe gap there between what's needed and then achieving beauty.
And what's
I think it's just helpful for our listeners to hear from leadership just your thought process on it, and that it's an ongoing open question. Like we genuinely evaluate when we go to add an element to the atmosphere of the room. Like, oh, is it worth doing that? Like, it is beautiful, but it also costs money.
Absolutely. Yeah, those conversations are happening constantly. Weekly.
We have a budget that we're responsible for.
Weekly. It
absolutely. It doesn't make sense to drop $5,000 on lights, even though they might be nice. You know,
and kind of just like with whatever song makes it into a set or a worship set on a Sunday morning, we should be able to have an answer for why that is intentionally there. We can walk you through the pros and cons list for each kind of decision in terms of the aesthetic and the oral appearance of a Sunday morning.
And you can I don't know. It is a tension. You can go off either extreme. And I feel like you know it when you see it, when somebody's pursuing just sort of...
Glitz.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm sensitive to that because I, in particular, when it comes to creative stuff, I want it to look good, I want it to sound good, I want it to be industry standard, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
But I'm constantly asking myself the question, would Dave think this is slick? Is this slick? Don't want it to be slick. Just want it to be good.
What has been interesting is, so since we have become, in the past year, a multi-site church with one of our campuses being set up tear down and the other being this campus where we have everything established and more lights and a room that can actually darken. We have skylights at Williams on the Lake. It creates two very, very different worship atmospheres. I actually don't know. It's a super stark difference, and it changes the way also that you communicate and connect with the congregation during the worship.
Totally.
Which is really interesting, just being able to see those faces more clearly. It's a smaller room too, so it's interesting what it does to again, communicating the storytelling that happens on a Sunday morning through our worship and whatnot.
Well, so you guys can do things we can't do. So a few weeks ago during communion over at Williams, during a worship song called, was it Every Table is an Altar?
Yeah.
That's the song. Williams is an intimate enough room that you actually had people from the congregation come forward, sit down at a table with the campus pastor, and do communion, break bread together, and then go sit back down. That would never work here. But other things we can do here, because we can totally black out the place. So like back in December when we had 3 of us on stage around a fake fire pit thing, lights way, way down, and kind of a heavy Sunday where we're talking about heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And that was communicated really, really well in this environment. So it's interesting how the different environments have different strengths and weaknesses for engaging people in worship and telling that story.
No, that's really good. I was kind of wondering, like, we're talking a lot about what worship looks like here.
Yeah.
There's people all over the world engaging in what they're calling worship. So there's even different, not only different Christian denominations, and there's folks down the road that are charismatic or reform guys, and they might do things differently, but then other whole religions and worldviews. So, people of the Islamic faith or Hindus, Buddhists, presumably they perceive themselves to be in worship. Are they worshiping? There is something about, so your initial
It
quote,
includes Jesus, right? My initial quote.
any act that places appropriate worth on the person of Jesus Christ. That's Tony 2018.
Yeah, I guess maybe I would amend that.
You would amend it.
Well, just in the sense that like
Is a Muslim person worshiping God when they're doing their
that's
different
a little
activities?
different. I was just going to say in terms of, you've probably heard in sermons everywhere that we are all worshippers and you're all worshipping something, and some of you worship sports and some of you worship...
I have heard that.
Beer.
Do you not like that?
No, it's fine, but I
Okay.
just mean that's my definition includes Jesus where maybe it shouldn't. It's like
Okay.
worship is worthship, putting worth on something. And that's done...
I
in
guess
a
my
million different
question
ways
is,
of
I'm wondering
expression.
about how expansive is the fold of what worship is.
Yeah, I mean, I think... Here's what I'll say on that. I think there are some people who worship the same God I worship, and they know him by a different name, and I don't think God really gives a rip about that. And then I think that I think he's much more concerned with his heart being known than his name being known. I actually think he's way more humble than that. But I also think that there are probably some people who think they're worshiping the same God I am, but the thing that they're worshiping doesn't exist.
Wow. That's so fascinating. But
That's
I think
how I
that
feel.
that response to that is consonant rather with the posture of the heart
Right.
discussion.
Right.
It's less about the mental assent to some proposition or belief, but rather it's the attitude of the heart.
Which I think is what Jesus instructs us to do, far more than accumulate knowledge. There's not one. I mean,
Right.
Is there a point at which, I mean, like, so he does at one point kind of rebuke the Sadducees for not knowing the scriptures or and misinterpreting them. But there's not. I don't know of any points at which he's instructing his 12 disciples to go spend more time in the scriptures.
study.
Right. Go study. No, it's go.
The Great Commission.
Go heal, go
live.
make disciples, go baptize people, like turn people's hearts and attentions towards God, like the God who loves them, right? Versus spending time accumulating head knowledge. And so, I tend to think that worship and knowing him in your heart and celebrating him that way tends to mean more than having the right knowledge, or even maybe the right knowledge informing the picture of who God is.
So just as we wind down, and to that end, you guys are both leading us super well on Sunday mornings in worship.
Thanks, man.
What would it look
That's very
like?
kind.
I'm just kind of wondering, like, here's your opportunity. Lead us in worship during the week. What are some things that we could all be practicing? Like, lead us in our weekly or daily worship. What are
That's
some
good.
practices that maybe you have found helpful, or?
Like in light of quarantine, or just in general?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is being recorded in the midst of the COVID-19 virus. We're all quarantined in our homes, except for right now, but we're socially distanced.
Yeah.
I think I have a few thoughts
Sure,
on
go
that.
ahead.
So one in particular that's big for me. I'm pretty extroverted. Relationships are really important to me, and so just an area I tend to think of myself as like as pretty worshipful on a regular basis is I'm just asking God through prayer and whatnot to just inform like who do I reach out to this week? Who do I like? I have friends who I don't talk to nearly as much as I would like to, but who am I going to direct intentional effort towards just reaching out to and letting them know how much I care for them, how much I'm praying for them and love them. And I just think relationships can be an area where we can open ourselves up to worship God through and to glorify him through. And I think, again, that's pretty close to the heart of Jesus, like the time that he spent with us here on earth. And I think it can be just like a slight paradigm shift rather than, oh, this is someone I have to talk to at the grocery store, like this cashier, rather than viewing it as a chore, where you could do that as minimally and as unworshipfully as you possibly can. Especially in the time of coronavirus, I will not talk to you. I will stay behind this new glass divider, and I will just insert my chip reader and then check out. Or you can take time to just let them know, like, you care for that person, and right now you're praying for them, and
What's so
their
interesting
health.
about that suggestion is I think a lot of us, I think I'm victim to this as well, is that we often think of worship as like something, it's a solo sport. It's something I'm doing with God. And sometimes on Sunday morning, we come together and we're all doing that kind of individually. It's corporate worship, but ultimately, like, I'm just going up here to God. But your example of like, the interactions with people in everyday life, and as I am going, that would count as worship too.
Well,
I think kind of blows the door open a little bit.
Totally. I was going to say, even something like, just again, going back to that all of life thing, how I speak to my wife can be an act of worship or not,
Just listening as she tells a story about a tough day she's had, or whatever. Like,
actually choosing to be present because she has value, because she's made in the image of God, and
Right.
I can honor him by honoring her. And as far as like practices, things that I do personally at home or whatever, I know a lot of people probably think I sit around all day with a guitar singing worship songs or listening to the latest Elevation album or something. That is not true at all. I do that on occasion, but for me, it's usually much smaller chunks of time. We talk a lot at Heartland. You've probably heard Ambrose talk a bunch about slowing and silence and that sort of thing. But for me, sitting quietly and listening to birds sing outside will do it for me. And that puts me in a place where, okay, I can return to just existing with God, and being grateful for the breath that's in my lungs that he gives me. There's a really good book on this that changed my thinking. Actually, you turned me onto it. Liturgy of the Ordinary. Yeah. You turned me onto that, right? Yeah. Liturgy of the Ordinary is all about turning your everyday life into a mindful, worshipful way of living, so that everything from your chores and washing the dishes can become an act of restoring order to a chaotic world.
Really good. Audiobook's very good.
Good stuff. Yeah. Liturgy of the Ordinary. Check it out.
Well, thanks, guys. Those are great suggestions. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Heartland Leadership Podcast. If you did find it enjoyable and helpful, feel free to share that on social media, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for having us.